All right, so last video of the week, I wanted to cover a couple last things with this inheritance stuff, and also to remind you guys to do your Mastering Biology that's due tomorrow by noon. Don't procrastinate any longer because it's going to take you some time. Yourstudy.com's all 5 of them due tomorrow at noon, and also your problem sets are going to be due by you can send me a picture. So I had you all write them down with your hands on paper, your Tuesday problem set, your Wednesday problem set, and then the Thursday problem set, which I have just posted. And I'll give you the answers to those here probably tomorrow at some point, but I want you to send me an email, or actually no, not an email, put them on the assignment link in Google Classroom that is labeled for problem sets Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, problem sets 1, 2, and 3. So just send it as a picture of all of the work that you did, showing and proving that you did those problem sets. So it's a lot of things due tomorrow at noon. You've had all week, but you'll have a weekend break. I'm not going to have you do anything over the weekend. Today I wanted to talk about a couple little tiny things. One is an exception to the inheritance patterns that we've looked at so far. So far we've talked about these chromosomes and how you have the exact same copy of a chromosome, one from mom, one from dad, where the genes are the same. It might be different forms of the gene, different alleles. You might have the dominant or the recessive from mom and dad or whatever, what have you. But they're the exact same corresponding gene on all the pairs of your chromosomes. However, there is one exception to that, and that is the X and the Y chromosomes, the 23rd pair of chromosomes, X and Y, which make you a boy or a girl. Those are unique because the X and the Y are not identical copies of the same chromosome. The X's would be, but the Y's is not going to be. That's going to be different for a male. They don't have the same. So what happens when something is on an X or a Y chromosome? It's going to really screw up the inheritance patterns because it'll depend on what gender you are. And so those are called sex-linked genes. And I wanted to give you a couple examples and show you how the Punnett squares are done with that. Before I actually show the Punnett square, let's take, for example, color blindness. It's on the X chromosome. It is recessive, so you have to actually end up, if you're a girl, you have to end up with both the little letter recessive to have color blindness. However, for a boy, since they wouldn't have the dominant, just one copy of the recessive is actually going to make them colorblind. And that's why boys are more likely to be colorblind, because when they get that X that's recessive, they don't have another X to be dominant to shade that. They just have a Y. So that's going to make them colorblind with just one copy of that allele. So let's say that we do a cross that's going to have a father who's colorblind with a mom who's not colorblind, but she's hybrid, where she carries that colorblind allele. You fill in the Punnett square basically, and we see here this girl's not going to be colorblind. This girl will be. This boy's not going to be colorblind. This boy will be. So 50% chance for the girls to be colorblind in this case, and a 50% chance for the boys to be colorblind in this case. If the mom had been fully homozygous, not even carrying the colorblind allele, then none of the kids, even though the dad's colorblind, none of the kids would be. If we take a colorblind father and a colorblind mother, all of the kids are going to be colorblind. Let's look at another one. This one's kind of interesting, I always think. Let's say you have a dad who's fine, but a mom who's colorblind. In this case, all of the daughters are going to be fine because they're going to get an X from their dad, and that X is going to be a dominant non-colorblind gene X. But all of the boys are going to be colorblind in this case. So here's an example where if you have a mother who is colorblind, or a mother who has any sex-linked trait, all of her sons, no matter what, are going to have that X-linked trait because boys only get their X from a mom. So if she has both copies of that gene, the boy is going to get what the mom has in that case. So colorblind female, all of her sons will always be colorblind or have hemophilia or whatever it is of the X-linked genes that you want to talk about. So that's how you look at X-linked, sex-linked gene linkages. You kind of have to give the percentages. Instead of giving 50% of the kids here would be colorblind, you should say 0% of the girls are going to be colorblind, 100% of the boys would be. And so that's how you should write it. When you do the problem set and whatnot. So that's the last type of inheritance pattern that we haven't really talked about. It's where the genes are on the sex chromosomes instead of the normal chromosomes, and that's going to influence things based on the gender. The last thing I want to talk about today is pedigrees. On the AP exam, you're going to be asked to look at and to analyze pedigrees for their types of inheritance patterns. The inheritance patterns that you could have could be autosomal or sex-linked. Autosomal just means regular. That's the ones we've looked at all week besides today. And that could be, is the trait dominant or is the trait recessive? And then sex-linked is if there's obviously something going on where it might be on a chromosome, a sex chromosome, and it's going to be influenced by your gender. But if we look at this one, I usually it's hard to do these. It takes a lot of practice, but you kind of just need to narrow it down and look, would this be possible for the regular inheritance patterns? This is one that's autosomal. It's a normal one, and it's appearing to be recessive because it's not that many of them. But I always usually go through autosomal first and be like, would it be possible? And if it's yes, then that's probably what it is. If you have two organisms, oh, by the way, for pedigree, I didn't explain how to read these. A square is a male and a circle is a female. If it's shaded in, that means they have the trait in question that's being discussed. The male and the female reproduce to have offspring, which is the bar below them, and then you can have further generations as you go on down the line. And these are used to just analyze the inheritance patterns of whatever the gene or the trait that you're looking at might be. If you have two parents that don't have a trait and they end up with a child that does, that means it's definitely going to be recessive here. Two hybrids can have 25%, if you recall, of a recessive little letter, where the other 75% chance might not. Here, if you have someone that has it, maybe a hybrid or a dominant that doesn't, of course it's not dominant, because if it was dominant homozygous, none of the kids would have it. He must be hybrid. Hybrid with someone who does have it, you usually get a 50-50. There's only 3 though, so that does make sense. It's so far so good. You have someone that has it with someone who doesn't, and all their kids don't have it. That's possible still because this female might be homozygous dominant. Remember how there's also 25% chance homozygous dominant? These two might be heterozygous. This is homozygous recessive. She's big letter. It appears to be. You know, I guess probability could show otherwise, maybe if you break probability rules. But it appears that she's big letter, and that's why all her kids, despite the fact that this guy has it, are going to not have that. Now, recall, though, that if she's big letter, and he's recessive, all these kids are now hybrids. So hybrid, you're going to end up with kids who have it, etc. So this does follow the patterns. It is possible. This is going to be a regular trait, autosomal trait, and it's going to be recessive. Now, if you have something like this one looks like it's going to end up being like dominant. Let's check to see. If the shaded in trait is dominant, now we're looking at the not shaded in ones as the recessive. If you have a dominant person, either heterozygous or homozygous, mating with someone who's recessive, you're usually going to end up with 50-50 results. Looks about right, 50-50. Same thing here, 50-50, right? Same exact thing. Now, when you have two people that have it, it's still possible to have someone that doesn't as a 25% chance if these two were hybrid, which they are because they have a parent who is recessive, so they have to be hybrid. Anyone who has it has to be hybrid if their parent was a recessive, because that little letter is going to go to all the kids from either if it's the first little letter or the second little letter, it's still a little letter no matter what. And so that does make sense that it's a regular inheritance pattern as always, makes sense, follows all the laws of what the probability would be. It's just dominant instead of recessive, but it's the same thing. It's just that the white ones this time are the recessive ones. I don't know why they do that, but that's how they do it. It's shaded in if you have the trait. So you kind of have to determine, is having the trait dominant or is having the trait recessive? Now, you might get something that's a little more complicating to see. And I should have made, this one's a hard one because I should have made you an easier one. But a key to determine if they're sex-linked or not, if you see that a mom has a trait and all of her boys have it, and none of her girls do, that's going to be a red flag to tell you that this might be a sex-linked gene. Okay, and then you kind of look at it around. Does it make sense that it would be a sex-linked gene? If there's a female who has it, all her sons would. We don't have any other examples of that. But you basically kind of have to look for those little cues and those things that are, if you have a pedigree where it's all squares. I think I had another one here. This one, obviously it's sex-linked. Only boys are getting it. And so that's how to determine if it's sex-linked or not. You kind of just have to look at the patterns. So that's it, pedigrees, analyzing pedigrees. You can look online if you want some more help analyzing pedigrees. It's not too hard. You just have to decide, is it a regular inheritance pattern? Does it follow the normal rules of probability? Or does it appear to be sex-linked where only certain genders are getting it, etc.? So it's not too difficult. It does take practice, though. It does take a lot of practice. So knowing about sex-linked Punnett squares was today's focus, and also analyzing pedigrees as well. So that's it for this week. That's it for everything that should be mostly on your Mastering Bio. Do all of your assignments then. Make sure your problem sets are all compiled on the same piece of paper. Take pictures of it and send it all to me on the link on Google Classroom for the assignment submission. If you have any questions about that, you can email me. This is the last video of the week. We'll start back up again on Monday. But again, just let me know if you have any questions. I will answer you as I have done for some people already. And I hope you guys have a great weekend.